So I've been watching a variety of videos, conversations about the relationship between human beings and nature, right? Both external nature as modern science has conceived of it, and internal nature as modern art, literature, psychology, and spirituality have conceived of it. And the videos include Mark Gaffney on Aubrey Marcus's podcast, kind of engaging in a mock debate with Yuval Harari, and attempting to sort of refute Harari's basic claim that value is fictional, that concepts, including human rights, money, corporations, God, that these are all made up stories. And all of our political ideologies, communist, capitalist, they're all also made up stories. And Harari is kind of foisting a relativistic, nihilistic anti-philosophy upon the common mind. He's very popular. His books have sold 50 million copies, and he speaks at the World Economic Forum every year, and he seems to be being taken up very easily by the zeitgeist, by the popular intellectual culture of our times. And Gaffney, is a philosopher and spiritual practitioner who I think delivers a rebuttal to this claim that value is unreal, and reaffirms that we have no scientific or religious reason, no philosophical reason to deny the reality of value. And in fact, the weight of the whole history of human reflection on these questions, for the majority of our history, has always been to affirm the ontological status of value. And, Gaffney will admit that there have been attempts to defend the objectivity of value, which have become justifications for violence and even the extermination of those who would deny that or did not uphold that value. And so there's a need for a shift from a kind of monotheistic conception of value to a pluralistic conception, where we're always going to be relating within a field of value, and it's evolving. It's an eternal field that's evolving with us because we are participants in the creation of it. But it's just that there wouldn't even be an us unless that eternal value were present in us, so as to inspire our learning, our deepening relationality, our pursuit of intimacy. We're inspired by the eternal field of value to enrich the eternal. The eternal wouldn't be freeing us into time unless there was something to be achieved here and now, again and again, always different. Eternity is in love with the productions of time, as Blake put it. And in fact, one of the other things I was listening to was Brendan Graham Dempsey and Layman Pascal talk about metamodern conceptions of nature. And they were talking about romanticism and the way in which it is quite characteristic of this, reaching for a more integral sense of the connection between mind and nature. And I thought of Wordsworth, his famous poem "Lines Composed a Few Miles Above Tintern Abbey," on revisiting the banks of the Vai during a tour, the River Vai, in Wales, written July 13th, 1798. And I'm actually going to read this poem in a minute, But you know, I visited Tintern Abbey when I traveled through the UK in 2010, and you know, I was a kind of eco-poetic tourist visiting this site because I was inspired at reading Wordsworth's poem, and inspired also by photographs or even paintings of Tintern Abbey from hundreds of years ago when it still had all this ivy growing on it, right? Like they've the Park Service or whatever in Britain took all the ivy off at some point in the early 20th century, I think around 1914. And so, you know, what Wordsworth and Coleridge and others, romantics, artists, painters, and poets who would travel to this site would have remarked as being especially enchanting about these ruins. The ivy, it was removed in the 19th century when it was officially made into a like historical site. And I felt like, yeah, an eco-poetic tourist visiting, but the thing is, already by 1798, like Wordsworth and Coleridge were also eco-poetic tourists, because there was a long tradition going back to the beginning of the 18th century and even earlier of, you know, people traveling to this ruin to take in the aesthetic, the romance of it, right? You know, it was built in the 12th century, but the Sistine Order was there, but it was shut down under the reign of Henry VIII when he dissolved the monasteries, and so from that point, you know, the Lord who owned the land there was given control over it, but he sort of took the lead off the roof and sold it off and let it decay. But by the 18th century, people were visiting it to take in the beauty of this mixture occurring between nature and man, this sacred cathedral architecture that was crumbling away and being overtaken by plants, ivy, swallowed back into the earth in a sense, but still standing strong and defined as a obvious the presence of intelligence on the earth, rendering itself in stone form as a response to the real dome, the heavenly dome above, and its sharply defined, you know, constellations of meaning. So there's value radiating down from the sky, right? And these cathedrals that we've built all over the planet, and temples and mosques and sacred architecture is a response to the value radiating to the earth. It's a response of the human eye to radiate back, not just a reflection of that value, but a true recreation of it. You know, we enjoy what we're given by the gods, and then we recreate and become as the gods. And in fact, there's a way in which I think the human being, to become natural or to become divine, I mean, I think for me, these words are interchangeable, so I guess Spinoza's right inevitably about that. But if we're going to come back into touch with nature, our own nature and external nature, the cosmos and the psyche, if we're going to intuit and participate in the world soul, I think it's going to be because we've grasped the call and response of creation and the incarnational role that the divine plays in creating, such that we, living beings with these physical and etheric and astral bodies, we are made in the image of that divinity, and so nature is the image of God. Nature is the body of God as well. Incarnational means that God is in the organism. The organism is a evolving process, forever enriching God's eternal vision. God not only sees, though, God feels, God responds to, and is passive before the creative onrush of this self-differentiating pluriverse. So let me read Wordsworth's poem, lines composed a few miles above Tintern Abbey. By the way, these crackers are really good, and they contain no natural flavors, but everything else looks real. Not product placement, by the way, but if Mary's Gone Crackers Incorporated does want to help me out, I'd be happy to eat more of your crackers on the YouTubes. So, Wordsworth, already being a eco-tourist, eco-poetic tourist visiting Tintern Abbey, writes, 5 years have passed, 5 summers with the length of 5 long winters, and again I hear these waters rolling from their mountain springs with a soft inland murmur. Once again I do behold these steep and lofty cliffs, that on a wild, secluded scene impress thoughts of more deep seclusion, and connect the landscape with the quiet of the sky. The day is come when I again repose here under this dark sycamore, and view these plots of cottage ground, these orchard tufts, which at this season with their unripe fruits are clad in one green hue, and lose themselves mid groves and corpses. Once again I see these hedgerows, hardly hedgerows, little lines of sportive wood run wild, these pastoral farms green to the very door, and wreaths of smoke sent up in silence from among the trees. With some uncertain notice, as might seem of vagrant dwellers in the houseless woods, or of some hermit's cave, where by his fire the hermit sits alone. These beatious forms, through a long absence, have not been to me as a landscape to a blind man's eye, but oft, in lonely rooms and mid the din of towns and cities, I have owed to them, in hours of weariness, sensations sweet, felt in the blood and felt along the heart, and passing even into my purer mind with tranquil restoration, feelings too of unremembered pleasure, such perhaps as have no slight or trivial influence on that best portion of a good man's life, his little, nameless, unremembered acts of kindness and love. Nor less, I trust, to them I may have owed another gift, of aspect more sublime, that blessed mood in which the burthen of the mystery, in which the heavy and the weary weight of this unintelligible world is lightened. That serene and blessed mood in which the affections gently lead us on, until the breath of this corporeal frame and even the motion of our human blood almost suspended, we are laid asleep in body and become a living soul. While, with an eye made quiet by the power of harmony and the deep power of joy, we see into the life of things. If this be but a vain belief, yet, oh, how oft, in darkness and amid the many shapes of joyless daylight, when the fretful stir unprofitable and the fever of the world have hung upon the beatings of my heart, how oft in spirit have I turned to thee, O sylvan Vi, thou wanderer through the woods. How often has my spirit turned to thee, And now with gleams of half-extinguished thought, with many recognitions dim and faint, and somewhat of a sad perplexity, the picture of the mind revives again. While here I stand, not only with the sense of present pleasure, but with pleasing thoughts that in this moment there is life and food for future years. And so I dare to hope, though changed, no doubt, from what I was when first I came among these hills, when, like a roe, I bounded o'er the mountains, by the sides of the deep rivers and the lonely streams, wherever nature led, more like a man flying from something that he dreads than one who sought the thing he loved. For nature then, the coarser pleasures of my boyish days and their glad animal movements all gone by, to me was all in all. I cannot paint what then I was. The sounding cataract haunted me like a passion. The tall rock, the mountain, and the deep and gloomy wood, their colors and their forms were then to me an appetite, a feeling, and a love that had no need of a remoter charm. But thought supplied, nor any interest unborrowed from the eye. That time is past, and all its aching joys are now no more, and all its dizzy raptures. Not for this faint eye, nor mourn, nor murmur. Other gifts have followed, for such loss, I would believe, abundant recompense. For I have learned to look on nature not as in the hour of thoughtless youth, but hearing oftentimes the still sad music of humanity, nor harsh nor grating, though of ample power to chasten and subdue. And I have felt a presence that disturbs me with the joy of elevated thoughts, a sense sublime of something far more deeply interfused, whose dwelling is the light of setting suns, and the round ocean, and the living air, and the blue sky, and in the mind of man. Emotion, and a spirit that impels all thinking things, all objects of thought, and rolls through all things. Therefore am I still a lover of the meadows and the woods, and mountains, and of all that we behold from this green earth, of all the mighty world of eye and ear, both what they half create and what perceive. Well pleased to recognize in nature and the language of the sense the anchor of my purest thoughts, the nurse, the guide, the guardian of my heart and soul, of all my moral being. Nor perchance, if I were not thus taught, should I the more suffer my genial spirits to decay. For thou art with me here upon the banks of this fair river, thou my dearest friend, my dear, dear friend. And in thy voice I catch the language of my former heart, and read my former pleasures in the shooting lights of thy wild eyes. Oh, yet a little while may I behold in thee what I was once, my dear, dear sister. And this prayer I make, knowing that nature never did betray the heart that loved her. 'Tis her privilege, through all the years of this our life, to lead from joy to joy. For she can so inform the mind that is within us, so impress with quietness and beauty, and so feed with lofty thoughts, that neither evil tongues, rash judgments, nor the sneers of selfish men, nor greetings where no kindness is, nor all the dreary intercourse of daily life, shall e'er prevail against us, or disturb our cheerful faith, that all which we behold is full of blessings. Therefore let the moon shine on thee in thy solitary walk, and let the misty mountain winds be free to blow against thee, and in after years, when these wild ecstasies shall be matured into a sober pleasure, when thy mind shall be a mansion for all lovely forms, thy memory be as a dwelling place for all sweet sounds and harmonies. Oh, then, if solitude, or fear, or pain, or grief should be thy portion, with what healing thoughts of tender joy wilt thou remember me, and these my exhortations. nor perchance, if I should be where I no more can hear thy voice, nor catch from thy wild eyes these gleams of past existence, wilt thou then forget that on the banks of this delightful stream we stood together, and that I, so long a worshipper of nature, hither came unwearied in that service? Rather say, with warmer love, oh, with a far deeper zeal of holier love. Nor wilt thou then forget that after many wanderings, many years of absence, these steep woods and lofty cliffs and this great pastoral landscape were to me more dear, both for themselves and for thy sake. So, sorry, I got a little carried away there. Wordsworth was having an experience of communion with nature and with himself, with his own memory of being in nature, and the harmony of harmonies was sounding through his, I would call this, autocosmological relationship, right, to the ground of being. This autocosmology term comes out of the work of Brian Swim and Carolyn Cook at CIS, where I teach. Autocosmology is what Wordsworth's doing in his nature poetry. It's what Dante is doing in the Divine Comedy. It's, what Augustine is doing in the Confessions. It's just the human being trying to relate themselves. Ow, Philo. He got me. He wants to play. So I better wrap up this nonsense that he thinks is a total distraction from what we should actually be doing, which is play, always. But I am playing in a way that Philo doesn't know how to do. So he's jealous, like the animals have to take the names we give them, even though they're just by virtue of being who and what they are, communicating their true name to us. We can decide to ignore that and call them something else. We can impose our own nomos. We can make up the law as we see fit and ignore nature and the deeper interfusion of our minds with nature that Wordsworth was trying to speak to there. And one of the things that I found somewhat paradoxical, was the way in which Gaffney was, really, I think, rightly critical of Harari for denying that human beings have any agency or freedom, that we're basically just machines that are determined, and we become embedded in these mimetic networks, all the lies, the fictions we invent to bind our civilizations together. Gaffney wants to refute this scientific materialism that and nihilistic relativism that Harari is putting forward, and I think that's an important thing to do. Harari's ideas, I think, are quite damaging. But the thing is, it's not just that materialism is false. Materialism makes itself true, right? And this is the thought that I have to credit Rudolf Steiner for showing to me, because it would be bad enough if materialism just needed to be refuted theoretically or something, that it was just wrong theoretically. But the thing about materialism is it makes itself true, and what that means is we begin to, if we take materialism seriously, nature is a machine, the human is a machine, we just make up our laws, and the ones that happen to dominate at a given time dominate because the people who believe them have power in that moment. And so all of the social and cultural values, political, economic values that we share with each other are made up by power structures. And it's, I think Harari seems to be some kind of, I would imagine, sees some kind of social Darwinism as not just, he wouldn't want to admit he's prescribing that, but he would say that's the correct description of what the human market is. It's this same Darwinian picture of nature projected onto the human economy. And the thing is, Darwin's biology was already borrowing metaphors from economics, and so where anthropologists would like to 19th and early 20th century anthropologists would like to say that it's the primitive societies that are animistic. They project their own invented social categories onto mechanistic nature. But you see the same thing happening in modern Western science too. Energy is the ability to do work, and Darwin's borrowing from animal husbandry and borrowing from Malthus and Adam Smith's understanding of human production and economic processes to understand the struggle for existence among organisms in the state of nature. And in this modern paradigm, the human being has all the value, and nature becomes our canvas, our sandbox. That it's just raw material waiting for us to reshape it, put our labor into it, and as Locke would say, until a man puts his labor into nature, that nature has no value. Any value it has comes from the labor that the human being puts into it. And that paradigm has led to, that civilizational story has led to a disastrous situation, right, socially and ecologically. And I think Gaffney's right to push back about that. But one of the paradoxes that I was also seeing is how what Gaffney was so worried about was the way in which the technosphere and the social media algorithms and the way in which human groups can be so easily psychologically manipulated by these machine learning algorithms, and that there's a value alignment problem with AI, that we have to give it some sense of what's important and of ultimate value and significance. And how do you arrive at the proper set of values? If Harari's right that it's all relative, then of course there can be no solution to the value alignment problem for AI, and human beings are doomed to become the pets of the superintelligence, or the elites that control the superintelligence. But the paradox here is, Gaffney wants to argue that we're free. Human beings we are free, and we want to express our agency so as to enter into ever more intimate relationship with others. So it's always agency in communion. It's always autonomy in communion. And, law is never fixed. The self-law giving, self-legislating being that we are as autonomous organisms is always in relationship to and embedded in a network of agreements with others. And so when we believe in materialism and we try to create a materialism story with other people, we make materialism true because we begin to surround ourselves with machines that treat us like input-output computers that can be easily trained. Think the internet is a Skinner box, and each of us is a pigeon inside, being conditioned to, respond, reflex, and have our reflex arcs guided by certain instinctual repetition compulsions. And so materialism makes itself true in that sense, that if we don't find there to be any real values or a field of values that our own sense of human importance arises out of, and that we should be responsive to. If we deny that that's true, we then can actually become, if not ourselves machines, then at least the victims of machines that degrade us to the machine level as human beings. And so it would be easier if we only had to theoretically refute materialism, but we actually have to recognize the practical aspect of this, the ethical and the participatory aspect of this, which is that don't try to theoretically refute materialism, just make it untrue by exemplifying the power of spiritual ideals that recognize that death is not the end in every sense of end, and that human existence is important because we have a role to play in cosmogenesis and the process of creation. Harari would deny all of that as just a fiction. And of course, there are ways in which we are creatures of symbol and story, and we are capable of imaginatively constructing alternative realities, simulations, that may in some cases, distract us or be subject us to illusions that, disconnect us from the true. And so we have to be careful. We have to proceed with caution. But, value being real means that it's part of our perception. It's part of nature and of our own bodies. Value is not a construct of human culture. Human culture is a emergent product of the cosmic values that we inherit. So materialism is a danger because to our mental and physical ecological health, because of the way in which it then goes about trying to make itself true. When people believe it, they really do become brain-bound and consider like the proper way of arranging an economy being a kind of struggle for existence among selfish individuals, rather than recognizing that to be an individual is always already to be in relationship to other individuals, right? And that relationality undermines any sense of selfishness even being possible. And so I guess that's all I wanted to say.